Hello, welcome to the MuseScore Café for today, Wednesday, July 17th, 2019. And my name is Marc Sabatella. I'm the Director of Education for MuseScore. This is my weekly series of kind of informal chats where I talk about some topic of interest to me and hopefully to you. And take questions, show you how to do things, whatever. As always, I'm checking to make sure I'm live, and am I? I need to check. Oh, here it comes. Okay, sorry. Okay, so the topic that I wanted to talk about today is parts. Generating the parts, but then more particularly, kind of doing what you might need to do to these parts to really make them playable by people. Because it's one thing to have a part, it's another thing for it to be really playable. So that's what I want to talk about. And there's an art to this. I know the techniques much more than I know the art. I'm somewhat familiar with the art, but I am by no means an expert. So one of the things I want to do here is point you to some resources. So one of the resources I've already put here in the chat, and it's a link to the book Behind Bars by Elaine Gould. This is absolutely like the definitive reference now for all matters of music notation, telling you, everything from which way stems go on in different situations to how much space should be between a bar line and an accidental, and everything about notation. But there's some really good stuff about formatting of parts. There's also a Facebook group that I guess, let me get to there. The Facebook group is Music Engraving Tips, it's called. So let's go here. Yes, Music Engraving Tips. I will say that it tends to be full. It's pretty contentious. There's lots of arguing and so forth in there about really esoteric things. And I don't know, it's kind of entertaining, I guess. So let me post that link. I will also mention about this is that MuseScore is still, I would say, its reputation in the world of music engraving was not good originally, because it was, didn't do what the big programs could do, but gradually over the years, MuseScore has gotten better and better and better and better, to the point where really it should be taken quite seriously. But we're talking, there's a lot of people on this Facebook group who are pretty conservative about such things and still maybe are skeptical. So, you do have to be a little careful saying if you try posting in there questions mentioning MuseScore. Okay, and I'm always good with off-topic questions. So is there a way to add a staff and then remove it later? So yeah, absolutely, you can have temporary staves. The way you do it is you add the staff, and I'll just show that right away. I'll just use the default score here. I'm going to add some notes. And apparently my sound's off, so let me get myself some sound here. Okay, and now let's say I want to add a staff somewhere. So what I'm going to do is go to the Instruments menu, I press I, I'm going to go ahead and add a staff. And now I have an additional staff. And now I can add my notes. Maybe I want it right here, and that's the only note I need. Then what I can do after you've added the notes, got to wait till after you've added the notes, we're going to go to Staff or Part Properties and set Hide When Empty to Always. By doing that, now that staff is now hidden everywhere it wasn't being used. There's also a global score-wide hide empty staves option that you can use also. But if you use that, then the oboe part disappears when it's not playing, which maybe that's what you want, maybe it isn't. So that's the other thing you can do. So if you go to Format, Style, And then it's right here on the score page, hide empty staves within systems. That'll hide them all. Okay, so as I said, there's some technique and there's some art. And I'm more familiar with the technique, but I'm trying to really come to grips with the art. So I'm just going to go through an example or two here of what might be involved. So this is a score I did not create. It's obviously not my composition, but it was created for the Open Score project, which is a wonderful project where a number of classical works are being transcribed and edited to look really good. But they only contain the scores, not the parts. So let's go ahead and generate some parts for this guy. So I go to File Parts, I hit Generate, and I hit OK. And a few seconds later, I will have my parts. My system tends to be a little slow while I'm doing these cafes. Some of you have noticed this process, even for this score, shouldn't normally take but a couple seconds. It's a pretty big score. For smaller scores, it's that much faster. All right, so now I've got all my parts. Well, since I mentioned oboe, let's go ahead and look at an oboe part. All right, we have an oboe part now. And this is already a part, right? It's got the stuff in it. Automatic placement is doing the things it's supposed to do as far as aligning my dynamics and hairpins. I'm hesitating because I'm trying to understand why these markings are so low below the staff. Probably there's something invisible that or something going on. I'm not going to worry about that at the moment, but I'm going to try to fix it later. So this is a part, and it's not terrible, is I guess my first observation about it. This is where MuseScore 3 really shines, because in previous versions there would have been just collisions all over the place. This accent mark would have probably been right on top of that rehearsal mark and so forth. So just by having MuseScore 3 and automatic placement, you get a whole ton of things that are done for you as far as making things look better. But people who do this a lot have a checklist. I'm still kind of developing a checklist here. This score is now big enough I can see that it is bringing my system to its knees. Works fine when I'm not broadcasting, so that's the downside. So one of the very first things that I would say is this is too cramped overall. Right? There are too many measures on this line. Now, this is for a couple reasons, but the main reason is that the score itself, if I go to Format, Style, Measure, you'll see that the spacing here was set to be very tight. And they did that so the score wouldn't be too many pages, although then they went ahead and added page breaks, so that ends up not being a thing. So just setting this back in the part to the default, and I hit the default button there, now it's 1.2, and then I can say apply to all parts. If I do that, it's going to take its time, but that's okay. I'll let it take its time, and then I'll press OK. So just going back to the default spacing is going to help a little bit, but the default spacing is a good spacing maybe for scores. It's generally speaking too tight for parts. So what you could do is increase that setting even further, say to 1.4, 1.5, to get your parts to be looser, fewer measures per line by default. So the old me would have just done that and called it good. But the reality is that's not good enough. Really, you should be looking line by line at where these line breaks are in the parts and thinking about where they are. So yeah, I'm sorry that I hit the Apply to Parts button, because again, this takes like 3 seconds if I'm not broadcasting, but while I'm broadcasting, it's I forget how slow things are sometimes. I suppose I could sign off for a second, but no, it'll finish, I'm sure. So I got music engraving tips. Okay. So really what's going to happen is once this comes back and I see that things are going to be a little more loosely spaced, I'm going to then go through and add line breaks where I see fit, both to make them less tight, but also to make it more logical. So the general idea is you want to not have a line break in the middle of a phrase. That's a general rule. If you know your music is really structured where everything is in 8-bar sections, then you can just have 4 measures per line and for most of it and call it good, or maybe 6 measures per line, something like that. Because really what you want is if most music is in 8-bar sections, there's 2-bar phrases within that, and it's really those 2-bar phrases you don't want to split up. But music doesn't necessarily always break down that simply, and just because the music breaks down in 2-bar phrases, any individual part might cross that. So you also kind of have to balance this against thinking, well, maybe this is the beginning of a section. I am so sorry that this is taking so long. I shouldn't have used such a large score. I should have remembered that while I was broadcasting this was going to happen. But should I just kill this and start over? It's going to finish. There's no reason to believe it won't. But I'm wasting time, and I just don't know if I'll waste more time if I start over or not. Oh well. I think I'm going to kill it because who knows? Control. Kill this guy. Sorry about this. And I'm going to just use a smaller score. So one of the reasons this came up for me while it's doing this, I'll just score and task. Okay. One of the reasons this came up for me, why I decided to talk about this week, is I recently had, I'm going to be performing with a big band coming up this fall, and I'm going to be doing a couple of my compositions that I've done parts for before, but I wanted to make the parts look better for this performance because it's a band that hasn't read these pieces before, so I wanted to have parts that I thought looked good. So that's basically why I started really playing with parts over the last week. Not that I've never played with parts before, but really getting into this a little more. So I'm going to show you one of the scores that I actually worked on, which is nowhere near as big as the planets. But now, of course, this is highly annoying to me. Yeah, I promise it's not like this. I don't even know what's going on right now. Okay. Okay, I'll just keep talking. Yeah, it's just trying to even show the start center. I think I must be trying to generate a thumbnail for the planets, probably, is my best guess. All right, so I'm going to load my score, Soon It's Gonna Rain, which I've been working on. Okay, no, I'm going to use Chrysanthemum Man because it's right here. So Chrysanthemum Man is a big band composition that I wrote, and it's nowhere near as big as the planets, but it still takes a couple seconds to load while I'm broadcasting. I think I must need to kill some other things because this is not right at all. Let me get out of my development environment. See if that helps. Okay. Here is a score, Chrysanthemum Man, and let me go ahead and look at a part. So this is a part that I've already done some work on, but not a whole lot because I was still being a little naive about thinking all I have to do is increase the spacing and I'll be happy. Because this looks okay. Right? It's not bad. So I think if I go to format style, I think 1.4. So format, style, measure. Oh, okay, I went with 1.3 for this one. Let me just go back to 1.2 because the point I want to make here is you're better off having things a little too tight, then you can just add line breaks. Then you don't have to worry about the stretch settings. So what I want to do is just quickly go through and add some line breaks in smart places. So, I could leave this where it is, but it's a little cramped, so I'm just going to put it in right before that rest and hit enter. Now I look at this and say I want about 4 measures worth, but I want to not be in the middle of a phrase, so I look and 1, 2, 3, 4 measures of stuff. I'm probably best off with that break right here. Here I can just say, gee, rehearsal letter A looks like a great place, right? So I'm just going to go through the score looking for these places. Now here you see all these phrases are across the bar line. So there's not going to be one simple, obvious place. But I can still count measures because these are 2-measure phrases. 1, 2, and then. So this is a smarter place than that, right? This is, as far as if I believe that these are 2-bar phrases, which they are, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, this is a smarter place to add a break than here. So I'm just going to do that, even though, okay, that's one place I had a slur across a line break. Other question, am I considering adding harmonica? Yeah, harmonica's totally there. Just go to the instrument list and add harmonica. It's under free read, I think is the category it's under, but you can also just, if you go to the instruments list, just type the name of an instrument, harmonica, and here it is. Yeah, there's all your harmonicas. There's tons of them, and just pick one, add it to your score, and you got yourself harmonica. Right? Okay, so yeah, I go through and I put in these line breaks to make it both spacious but also hopefully logical as far as where these breaks are. Another, nothing wrong. I mean, just feel free to be asking. Oh, harmonics. All right. Harmonics are, the notations are there. If you go to the articulations thing, there's some of these articulations can be useful. If you press Z to go to the symbols palette, and then you can look for harmonics in here. There's additional symbols that can be used and other symbols that are used for harmonics. Lots of different ways of notating harmonics. Now, as far as the playback goes, there's nothing currently to make that happen automatically. If you've got a sound font that has the appropriate sounds, you're welcome to use that sound font, but not a the playback isn't something that we directly support, and there's not really any specific plans to get that detailed about playback. You never know, but it's not really something we're looking at the moment. Okay, so you go through and add these line breaks where you see fit. The other thing you often want to do is, it's not necessary, but if it happens to work out well for a rehearsal letter to be at the beginning of a line, that's good. If it happens to work out well for a repeat sign to be at the beginning of the line, that's good. So I might just do that, and then as I'm going through these remaining ones, see where does it make sense to put my break. Oh, it looks like if I put my break right here, click that bar line, there you go. That's not bad. This is maybe a bit cramped here. Maybe I would have been better off. Let's actually see if I'm better off putting the break there, if that looks better to me. Does that look better? Yeah, maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. Anyhow, there's no law that says you have to start the repeat at the beginning of a line, but it is considered good form, especially for things like DS's and putting the senyo at the beginning of a line. So anyhow, you should be paying attention to these details. Here's an opportunity to put a rehearsal letter there. Here's an opportunity to put this at the beginning, but I think that even that's not good enough. I think I want another... that's a little loose, but that's okay. You'll end up with more pages. 3 is like a magic number for pages, and so that's the next topic. I've been talking about line breaks, but page breaks are really an important thing. That's part of the art that I don't have a full, real I'm not the expert on. But I do know like 3 is the number of pages that generally fits on the average music stand. And so if your part fits in 3 pages, great. You don't have to turn pages. But as soon as you get past there, you have to start thinking about where the page turns are. And you don't want to have a page turn in the middle of like some complicated eighth note line. Let me get rid of that line break. Like this is a terrible place for a page break right here. Put the page break here right before that rest or after the rest, either way, so that people have time to make the page turn. So that's really where you want to make your page turns happen. Again, it's not so important between page 1 and 2 or between 2 and 3 because they're all going to fit on the stand anyhow. But after page 3, it's going to be an issue. So you really have to be thinking about things like that. And although you wouldn't think so, if you look on music engraving tips, every once in a while people say, what's the most important thing to think about? Page turns. Everyone says page turns. Most important thing that people should think about but don't. So that's something else that you would be wanting to think about. So right now, this was going to fit on 2 pages. Now it's on to 3 pages, but I'm okay with that. I'm okay with it being 3 pages as long as I'm careful enough about my breaks. I mean, about where my page turn, where my breaks are within here. So as I'm adding more page breaks, this 3rd page is going to start filling up. But hopefully I can keep it to 3 pages. If it starts to spill over to a 4th page, I'm probably going to try to be a little more, I'm going to consider being more conservative and start allowing more stuff per system. I might start allowing my systems to get closer together, but you have to be careful about that. You don't want the systems so close together that it looks like this rehearsal letter is on this system, right? Or that this dynamic is down on that system. Is there a shortcut for page break? Yeah, control. So enter is line break, control enter is a page break, just kind of the way it is in most word processors, really. So let me just quickly go through, and so again, if I count, here's how I often count measures: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. All right, I'm going to go with 6 here. And here it looks like if I went with 4, if I go with 6 here, this is looking a little cramped compared to the others, so I think I'm going to let this one be spaced more. I could have gone with 4. In fact, I think I'm going to just do that. I'm just going to go 4 here, 4 here, and that way letter K is at a line break. If this ends up, and then here's 4 measures, I can let L at least put the multi-measure rest there. I can put M here. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'll put a line break there. Put a line break at N. And 1, 2, 3, 4. You can also just click a note, by the way, and press enter. I think I added that some point a couple of releases ago. Okay, it looks like I'm still going to be able to fit on, yeah, that's good enough. 1, 2, 3. So here, I'm not counting measures. I just know that there's a rest, so that's going to be good. Here's a rest, that's going to be good. Here's a rest. And again, you can put the rest at the beginning or at the end of the line, as long as it, you're not trying to phrase across the middle of it. And there you go. I managed to keep everything there. And now this is a frame that I had at the end of the system, last system, so that I could also balance how long I want this to be. And I mean, I could just go to the end of, let this go all the way to the end, but I have this in the score, so each part gets a horizontal frame, so I don't want to delete it or delete it from the other part, so I just make it arbitrarily small if I decide I really want it to go to the end. So I'll just make it be 1 space so I can still select the thing. All right, so I've managed to do this and keep it to 3 pages, so this is actually now pretty good. And I don't want to, again, mess with the system spacing. So I feel like that's okay. I had already made some adjustments here, like I had the default positions of these guys. Let me show you what they looked like. Let me reset him. You can see the default positions of these guys were abutting. They, the B was, rehearsal letter B was avoiding that to coda, but not in the way that I wanted it to. Sorry. Yeah, boy, it's slow even on this score when I'm broadcasting. So all I did is I clicked this guy and I moved it to the left a little bit. Moved him like 2 control clicks left, and I moved this guy like 2 control clicks right. You don't want to get this guy so far to the right that it's not near the bar line or that it's unclear what it applies to. How did I add a frame? The frames are here under the frames and measures. So again, what I did is I added that frame in the score. So that's basically right before the end. I added that frame in the score, and I added 2 of them. So I dragged it from insert horizontal frame, and just dragged it right to this measure. I added 2 of them, knowing that this one was going to be at the end of one system on the part, and this was going to be at the beginning of the next. So that when I go to my part, you can see that there was a frame at the end of one system that I used to kind of fine-tune. If there was only 1 or 2 measures left over here, I would first think about whether I could fit them up here. But if not, then I'm like, okay, I'm just going to have a lot of empty space and make that frame be really big on this part. But I also want the frame at the beginning of the next part to indent the coda, because that's pretty standard. So I did that. So that's this whole process of what I've been talking about is called casting off. And it's really kind of the most time-consuming, the most important part of really making things readable, given that MuseScore can't do it automatically for you. Now, there's some other things that are worth doing that I will kind of quickly go over as I look at this. One is, like, this slur here is too curved. It's too high. We are trying too hard to avoid this sharp sign here. I look at that and think, you know what, I don't love it. So what I could do is double click it and start, adjusting it and fiddling with it by hand. And if I was doing this professionally, I guess I would spend my life doing this. That's what I'm told is the thing, is you spend your whole life manually adjusting your slurs so that they look the best that you can make them look, and whatever. However, I don't have that kind of patience. So I just hit Control R to reset. I'm just going to press equal sign. Equal sign turns off automatic placement for the slur. What that'll do is move the endpoints right next to the notes, and then I look at, can I live with that collision? And the answer is probably yes, but if not, I might just raise the middle point a little bit, do something really simple to improve it slightly and call it good enough, because I'm not trying to win any engraving awards. I just want to create a basically readable score. And so to me, that's basically readable. It's good enough. I might do the same thing to this slur. And again, I could leave it as it is, but maybe 1 control click to raise that midpoint makes me a little happier. So I'm looking at slurs that need adjustment. Here's another one, same deal. As you can see, it's really the accidentals that are causing these things. And here's one where I can see right now that I don't think I'm going to want to do that, because if I do that, it's going to bring everything in too close, and I don't think I'm going to like it. I think I'm just going to leave that as it was. So I'm just going to reset it. So it's this avoiding of the accidentals on these slurs that's making them a little too much. So, so that is something that I know from experience is going to need at least some adjusting. MuseScore 3, again, is a ton better than MuseScore 2 in this respect, as far as how well it's able to avoid things, so that you only have to now correct the cases where it went too far, and just hitting equal sign so it goes back to essentially what would have been the MuseScore 2 default, kind of fixes it for you. So, at that point, this part looks pretty good to me, and I spent longer on it because I was talking about it than I probably would in real life. In real life, I could have added all those line breaks and adjusted those slurs in like a minute. But even so, this is 17 parts. It's going to take 17 minutes to go through this whole thing. And realistically, some of the parts, like the piano on a big band chart like this, piano, bass, drums, the rhythm section, and guitar, usually require more thinking, more, because you're going to have to pack them in tighter. Because they're playing all the time, you don't get as many multi-measure rests, and the piano is likely two staves. So, and you're probably going to have to go past 3 pages, so that you spend longer on those. But the process is basically the same. I look at here and think, is this getting to be too close to this staff below? Is it the rehearsal? Is it the measure number that's causing it? I could move the measure number. No, it's not the measure number that's causing it. It's just the default. So if I move this up, it will bring that dynamic with it. It didn't bring this dynamic up because it's an older score. This hairpin really should have started there. And if it started there to begin with, then they all move together, except they don't, because I had already adjusted it manually. But I'm just going to put that back the way it was, because I don't want to mess up how it was in the score. But normally this is how you should do things in MuseScore 3. In MuseScore 2, this hairpin would not have avoided that dynamic. They would have collided with each other. And so in MuseScore 2, you kind of had to use that approach of doing what I'm doing about here, shift right to move the hairpin to start on that note. That was the sort of cheating way of avoiding collisions, but it's not really necessary anymore. So really the last thing that I want to talk about that I have any insight into is enharmonic spelling. There's certain places where there might be lines that are tricky, for whatever reason, in terms of the spelling of lines. Like here, I got an E sharp here, right? I've got E sharp, which is legitimate. That's because it's transposed, right? This is an alto saxophone part. In concert pitch, this made more sense. It was G sharp, A sharp, right? That wouldn't have confused anyone. But I have to now consider, do I really want in transposed pitch this to be an E sharp? So what I'm going to do is I might change some of these spellings, but I only want to change it for the transposed version. In other words, when I go back to concert pitch, I still want to see the G sharp, because I know for a fact this is an E major chord right here. It's my composition. I know there's an E major chord here. If I go to the score and look at that spot just before letter C, Control F, letter C, and I find that spot here, and scroll down, there's no rhythm section's not playing there, so you can't see my chord symbol, but you can certainly see the trombone having a G sharp, a B, and a D. So anyhow, and there's a D in the bass, but there's E's. That's this F sharp for the trumpet. That's an E. So anyhow, it's an E chord. I don't want to misspell the chord in concert pitch mode, because I want to be able to read my score in concert pitch with the correct harmonic things. But I do want to correct or improve this. There's nothing wrong with this, but I want to improve it. So Control J respells things just in the current mode. So if I press Control J for this, it'll turn it into an F, but when I press concert pitch, it'll still be a G sharp. J is the command to respell in both modes. If I had used the J command, it would have changed this also to an A flat, but I don't want it to be an A flat. It's an E chord. So I go back to this, and I'm actually going to do this whole little passage here. So I do this, and I have to think about how far I want to go. So ba-do-da-dum. If I just go this far, then I've made the kind of minimum change that I feel like I need to make. I can keep this F sharp as an F sharp and then be happy with how things are. I could have chosen to go all the way and call this a G flat, but then I would have had to look at, do I really want to have G flat followed by E? Think about that for a second. G flat to E is a whole step, but it doesn't look like a whole step, right? If I respelled this guy as G flat, this looks like a third. This kind of stuff drives people batty when they're playing, because you start to put two fingers down if you're a saxophonist, thinking I'm going by a third. I got to put two fingers down, and they're gonna misread it. They're gonna get it wrong. Um, so you really want to think about things like that. If something is a step, it should look like a step. If it's a third, it should look like a third. That makes a big difference for readability. So sometimes you really have to juggle the spelling of notes in a way that makes them maybe not correct harmonically, but more readable. Now, it's less important in a passage like this, half notes and quarter notes. It's more important in a passage that's like, eighth notes and 16th notes. So anyhow, I don't want that way. I want this F sharp there. So this now to me is the better version of that. So often I know there's places, I know in advance where in my score I've written passages where that's likely to be an issue. I'm often aware of it while I'm writing the music, or I'm aware of it while I'm entering it, scoring it out. But still, I want to do some spot checks here, just looking for things that look funny accidental wise. That's something you develop through experience, and I've got a lot of experience with that because I've done that sort of thing very often. Even if this whole idea of really planning my line breaks, I do that for the rhythm section because I know the rhythm section really needs to know the form of the piece to play effectively. But I used to think, well, saxophonists don't care, you just play the notes. But more and more I'm hearing other people tell me, no, it really does matter. It really does affect the readability. And as long as you keep everything to under 3 pages, it's not costing you anything except a little ink and paper, but it's not costing anything in terms of like making it harder to read because it's more pages. You've really made it easier to read. So, here's the passage here I should be looking at. Da, 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 da. Right, this is chromatic. Da, 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 da. And I think about, well, would this have been better spelt as a G flat? If I'd spelt this as a G flat, then I wouldn't need the natural sign here. Yeah, I can do that, but I could drive myself crazy trying to respell everything. So I don't want to do that. I'm not going to respell everything. I'm just going to, knock off the big guys. So I think I just made some pretty significant improvements to that part over the way I had originally created it. And I would then just go through that same process on every part then to do it, because this is not the kind of stuff that can be automated, really. It's the kind of stuff that requires you to put some effort into how you do things. So again, there are people who specialize in the things that I'm talking about. I know how to work the software so that, once I know where the line break is, I can tell you how to do it. Select the measure, select the line, select the bar line, and then press enter. I know how to do these things. I have some insight into the kinds of things that you should maybe be thinking about, but I am hardly the world's biggest expert on really how you should be wanting to do these things. I'm looking at this A now, wondering, is it just high because of the clef, or did I previously manually adjust that thing? No, I think it's just because of the, had this been in the middle of the system, it would have been lower like this, but at the beginning of the system, it got pushed up because of the clef. What I could do is just push it over so it's not as high, but I don't think I want that. I think I want it. One of the whole points of getting it at the beginning of a system was to make it stand out a little more. The only question is, is there some confusion about which measure this applies to? But no, everyone knows, or everyone is supposed to know, measure numbers go, rehearsal marks go above the staff, and so no one's going to think that this is that. Speaking of measure numbers, I've elected to put measure numbers on every measure, which is not necessary, but it's I find very useful as a conductor to be able to tell people let's start at measure 37, or rather than having to say, well, let's go back to A or 4 after A. I mean, we'll do that, but sometimes I just want to start right at 37 because I only want to play 37, and so I want to be able to know, well, where is measure 37? It's right here. One thing I probably should do is look to see, now that I have measure numbers on every measure, did I create any problems for myself there? Like, this is getting close to that, but no collisions, right? This beam is also close, that guy's awful close. I could, if I chose, move that guy out of the way. But, again, I think I'm I'm trying to be pragmatic and do the changes that I know will really make a difference. And yeah, if I was really trying to get this published to a major publisher, I would probably go further with the same sorts of things that I'm talking about. But for me, I think this is good enough. So there's one other topic that I'm not going to talk about except to say it's a thing. In orchestral scores, it's really common to want to add cues. So like we've got 7 measures of rest. Look at all those rests. It would be kind of nice maybe for this person to know, well, what's happening right before that, so that they can see maybe this is the alto, maybe the trombones were playing in here, and they might want to know what the trombones were doing here so they can, I hear the trombone doing that thing I see notated, and then do it. So you can do that. You can add cues here, but they're going to appear in both the score and the parts, which isn't what you usually want. So I'm going to turn off multiple measure rest for a second, and let's just enter a cue. What I could do is I could go to the score. I said I wasn't going to do it because I don't really have a good strategy for you, but I can at least show you what's involved. If I go to letter J and then back up a little bit where that alto comes in, I don't know. I'm just going to copy and paste this. So I paste in the notes, and now he's got a copy of those notes. Because they're cue notes, there's a few things that I want to be true of them. I want them to not play. I want them to be small, and I'm going to use the chord section of the inspector here. Is my face covering the play? Trust me, there's a box here that says play. I'm going to use the chord section of the inspector to make them small. That way it makes the stem and the beam and the accidental and everything else small. If you use the note section, it basically only applies to the note head. So I press the notes button, then the play to turn off so they won't play, and then I made them small. So these are now cues. But as I said, they really should only be in the part, not in the score. So everything I just did really wasn't relevant. If I'd done those things before generating the parts, I think, so notes, I'm pressing a button that says notes there. So instead of having the whole range selected, only the notes are selected. So turn off play, make small. All right, so now these are cues, and then I could also add text that says trumpet, so that this guy knows now that that's the case. And now I can press M to turn multi-measure rest back on. And now he knows that that's what's there. But in the score, what I really need to do is make all those guys invisible by unchecking visible. And when I do that, I don't want to only do that to the notes. I want to select the whole range. So I'm going to select that whole range and select invisible. And now the measure's invisible, so it won't really show up in the score, but by gosh, look at that. There's not a rest in there. I don't have to enter a rest. I don't have a good strategy for you there. That is a feature we need to implement at some point to make that process work better. That stuff is much more common in orchestral scores than jazz scores, I will say. So, there's a whole lot to this topic. Some would say I've only scratched the surface, but it's a pretty big surface, and I think I scratched it pretty well. So, if there's more questions, I'm happy to answer more questions to people who are still watching live here. Meanwhile, I want to tell you about some of the other things coming up that I might plan to talk about. One big one is accessibility. This has been a major topic for me. If you've been paying attention to these cafes from the beginning, you've probably heard me talk about it a few times by now. The idea of making MuseScore usable by blind musicians, or usable to create scores that are usable by blind musicians. For instance, to use it to create Braille scores. We don't support Braille directly, but we can export to Music XML, and then you can import that Music XML into tools that can help you create music Braille. So this has been an important issue for me because it's how I actually got involved with MuseScore in the first place many years ago, where I had a blind student who I needed to find a way of working with her. It was a music theory course, so she had to learn to do the things that we were doing, writing out writing out music, basically, to show her knowledge of the music theory that she was learning. So we were looking for tools that she could use to create music, and MuseScore at the time, this was like, oh my gosh, 9 years ago. 9? Yeah, I think so. I think literally it was fall 2010. I should look that up. But yeah, MuseScore wasn't ready yet. It's still not completely there, but it's pretty darn good. It's pretty close. You can do an awful lot, and I've so it's coming up as an issue now because I'm gonna have another blind student coming up this fall, and I think we're going to try to use MuseScore now to do the things. We found other tools we could use to let her create notated music by typing, basically. It was a text-based language called ABC. I'll talk about this when I talk about it. But anyhow, I'm going to be talking about accessibility in a future cafe, sometime within the next month, probably, before school starts or shortly after school starts. So that's a topic I know I want to talk about. Google Summer of Code is in full swing. I want to show off what some of the students are working on there, because a number of them have some really good stuff to show for it. Those are a couple topics. It's been suggested that I talk about percussion and the MuseScore drumline extension in particular, which I still need to learn more about to really show it off. But yeah, I will be looking at doing that. If you've got more ideas, feel free to pass them along. So those are some of the things that you can look forward to in upcoming weeks. Also, I'll be talking about music theory, composing, that whole process, because that's why we use this software. At least that's why I do. So I hope you all have a good week, and I will see you next time. Bye.